Shalom and welcome back to Torah and Psychology. Today we start with a song to lead us into the topic of what we're going to discuss. Get us pumped. Here we go. What is this word? So we're looking at this word, levado. Somehow it has to do with our lives. All right. So this is an awesome epic song. You could find it online if you look at Veniskav Hashem, The Secrets, Hasodot. But why am I playing you a song to begin an episode of Torah and Psychology? Well, today we're going to discuss the topic, the oh so taboo topic called loneliness. So what was that word levado? Oh, it means alone. And what were those words? What are they singing? So what they're singing is Veniskav Hashem levado. And this is a reference to the pasuk in Yeshayahu 2:11 that it says, and God will be exalted alone. For example, many of us know this from the Aleinu. Bayom hahu, yeh Hashem echad u'shemo, shemo echad. Hashem will be one, but also that Hashem is going to be alone. He'll be exalted alone. Interesting. What's the second verse of this song? V'yavater Yaakov levado. V'yavater Yaakov levado, vaya'avek ishimo. What's that part of the song? And what is that referring to? Well, now we're leaving Yeshayahu and we're going into Breshit. For in setting the stage for battle between Yaakov and the angel, the verse relates, V'yavater Yaakov levado, that Yaakov was left alone. This is from Breshit 32:25. So now it's interesting because here we have two different descriptions of loneliness from the Bible, and they kind of represent a different aspect of loneliness. Like God is going to be alone, or God will be exalted alone. Sounds like a great thing, right? But then you have Yaakov, and he's in this battle for his life and for his identity. And many of the commentaries say that actually what we should have learned from this is it wasn't good for Yaakov to be alone. I pulled up a quote, see if I have it to share with you. Okay, so like, what's the deal with loneliness in the Torah? Well, gosh, I mean, there's so many examples of loneliness in the Torah, you wouldn't even believe it. If you start looking it up, you can find loneliness in the stories of Yitzchak and Rachel, of King Uzziah and Tamar, of Jeremiah and Honi, of Hagar and Aharon. So for any in-depth studiers, there's a book called The Heart of Loneliness by Rabbi Mark Katz, who is a specialist in loneliness. And he says that the Bible is just chock full of loneliness. He even mentions David HaMelech when he calls out Mima'amakim kraticha Hashem in Psalm 130, I believe, that he's calling out from the depths of his soul. He's all alone and he's crying out. So gosh, we have so many examples of loneliness in the Bible. And in fact, it starts all the way back. Act 1, scene 1 of the Bible, literally. I mean, if we're talking Perek Bet, so that's chapter 2, right? This is not Act 1, scene 1, but it's pretty close. And it's in verse 18. God creates everything, the sun, the moon, the stars, the earth, the vegetation, the birds, the fish, then the animals and Adam himself. And at that point, God says, it is not good that man be alone. I will make him a helper corresponding to him, or in Hebrew, Vayomer Hashem Elokim lo tov, not good. Heyot ha'adam levado, right? There's that word levado. It's not good for man to be alone. Well, in that case, aselo ezer kenegdo, that Hashem would make a helper corresponding to him. In other words, a woman, his partner. But interesting that as the Bible begins, everything God makes, he says, and it was good, and it was good. And he made the luminaries, and it was good. And he made the firmament, and it was good. And he made the teeming creatures and the oceans, and it was good. And then he makes man, and man's alone. He's like, not good. Yeah, not good. And it's the first time we see something described in the Bible as not good. So, wow, this is interesting. I guess if you've ever felt alone, God is like really giving you validation. Like, that's probably not feeling good for you, you know? Or actually, if you've ever felt alone and you were looking to know that you weren't alone in your aloneness, you can just hark back to Adam, the first man, one of the first human life experiences that we had essentially, or that God bared witness to, was man alone. Doesn't work so much. How interesting. And it's not only that, we are called a nation that dwells alone. The Jewish people themselves are known for this uniqueness. It's this uniqueness of the Jewish people that it's totally isolated on one hand. And on the other hand, like, that's supposed to be like a really good thing, that even though the world is perpetually and always against us and we're facing opposition and persecution from the greatest superpowers the world's ever known, we've outlived them all. And we do stand alone, and that's a praise of the Jewish nation. So first of all, if you never thought about this concept, especially because loneliness is super taboo, this is like wild to open the Bible and find this abundance of examples of the Bible discussing this topic. I thought that's pretty fascinating, especially because, like, you know, when people say like, how are you? Like, there's some of us that just will say like, Baruch Hashem, or like, good, thank you, how are you? Or, you know, some people, how you doing? They say, oh, great, excellent. But then there's like people who want to give like an honest answer to whatever they're feeling. So if you say, how are you? They'll say, I didn't have such a good day. Or like, crappy day, you know, or like, not doing so good, having a hard time. But what you really won't find people saying is, I've been feeling really lonely. Right? Imagine if you were feeling really lonely and someone asked you how you were and you took it as genuine and you said, I'm feeling lonely, right? That's something that, while it might be true, like in Western culture, to say that might be considered totally socially awkward. Like, did you just declare you were lonely? You know, like, what's up with that, yo? Like, or it kind of like makes us feel like a pariah. Or if I announce my loneliness, then perhaps people want to be around me less and then I'll be even lonelier. So, how interesting to open the Bible and see that this topic that it's so difficult to talk about is just all over the place. In fact, there's even a really, really famous book. If you have heard of Harav or the Rav Soloveitchik, Rav Yosef or Joseph B. Soloveitchik, he even wrote an entire book on this. This is totally really well known and highly recommend it. You could buy it on Book Depository or, who knows. It's called The Lonely Man of Faith. So just here in the description, I'm going to read to you what it says because he has a whole nother take on loneliness. It says that in this book, Soloveitchik investigates the essential loneliness of the person of faith in our narcissistic, material-oriented, utilitarian society. In this modern classic, Soloveitchik uses the story of Adam and Eve as a springboard, interweaving insights from such important Western philosophers as Kierkegaard and Kant with innovative readings of Genesis. So what he's trying to do, he says he explains prayer as the harbinger of moral reformation and discusses with empathy and understanding the despair and the exasperation of individuals who seek personal redemption through direct knowledge of a God who seems remote and unapproachable. He shows that while the faithful may become members of a religious community, their true home is the abode of loneliness. And some of us can really relate to this. One time I was in LA and I was at the checkout counter at the local supermarket. And on my way out, I just said to the cashier, "God bless you." And she looked at me like, that is, and she said something like, "God, my God is none of your business." And I was like, okay, now I'm not saying this is common. There are a lot of faithful people in America, but I was just like, oh my God, I'm an alien. I'm totally an alien here. Like, to be a person of faith who trusts in God and believes in, the Torah and the morality of the Torah, like that's really alien today. And if you want to stand on your morals and principles and values just religiously, you might find, as I have in many instances, feeling very alone in this practice of faith. And the funny thing is, it's almost like one necessitates the other, because you might not just fit in anymore in our culture if you're like sort of eternally and consistently aspiring to come closer to your godly self. It might pull you away from these physical things that often lure us away from our spirituality, our godliness, or our faith, or our, desire not to be gluttonous, or not to overbuy, or not to have lust with money, or, all of these things. They're a lonely pursuit in this world. They really are. So I found this to be also very interesting. Another just example of someone else feeling like an alien in the Bible. In the beginning of Parshat Chayei Sarah, Avram introduces himself to the people of Canaan, the land that is promised to his descendants. And in doing so, he also introduces us to ourselves. He says, and this is from Rabbi Michael Dolkin, Ger vetoshav anochi imachem, translated as, I am a resident alien among you. Or some people say, I am a resident and an alien among you. This is from Genesis 23:4. So what's very interesting about this particular passage is he's saying that even though he's going to dwell within them and dwell in their culture and in this land, that while he is dwelling here, he is a toshav, he is a resident, but he remains a ger, a stranger, an outsider. And I mean, in addition to that, we have all of the laws in the Bible. There's so probably like really many of them, like serious mitzvahs from the Torah itself that talk about making sure to take care of the stranger and the widow and the orphan. If you want to define one thing that really lies in common between all these people we're supposed to take extra care for, a stranger feels alone. A widow loses her husband, feels desperately alone. Just a personal note, I was just standing outside my front door and my neighbor came by and she looked at me. I've never even spoken to her, honestly, because our entrances come from a different place. And she just looked at me and she's like, my husband died. And I was like, on the one hand, not my first response, but part of the response is like, okay, like, why are you telling me this? Okay, hi, I'm Neely, your neighbor, and on the other hand, I just saw in her eyes this abyss of loneliness that she sort of just kind of needed to announce by telling me. So yeah, widows and orphans as well. Like, gosh, no one should ever know of it, but I'm sure that is the feeling of deep aloneness. And because we were strangers in Egypt, we're told to really care for strangers and make sure that this issue of loneliness is dealt with, because as we know, lo tov, it's not good. But here's the thing. It would get really, really easy then to feel that when we are alone, there's something not good about it. Or when we are lonely, there's something not good about it. Well, another spin on loneliness is the practice of Rabbi Nachman of Breslov, who suggests as his, I'd say, number one recommendation in prayer to do a practice called hitbodedut. Well, hitbodedut means to be alone with oneself, with God. He recommends that people go out into nature, find a place where they're completely alone, so alone that even if they were to scream, no other human can find them. And he even recommends taking an hour every single day to be alone with God, to be alone. And actually, when I was first becoming religious, I asked people that I admired, like, what were the number one rituals or practices or meditations that help further them along their religious journey, their path to becoming a greater human. And many, and I'd say even most, or if not all, said hitbodedut. So I practiced it myself. I practiced it a lot. There were certain months where I would go out for 3 or 4 hours a day to the forest just to be alone with God. And so I can now second and say that these people were correct, that in my own spiritual path, the thing that helped me grow the most and me feel the most connected was this aloneness. It really made a difference in my personality when I was practicing it. And I really felt the benefits of this aloneness. So, well, God says it's not good to be alone. A lot of people are alone now and in the Bible. Rabbi Nachman says it's great to be alone and we need to be alone. So what is it? Which one is it? So what we're going to do is we're going to look at the interesting difference between loneliness, aloneness, and what to do when you feel either of these and how should you think of yourself. So I want to just bring a few little explanations, a few definitions on what is loneliness, right? And this is by Mark Katz. He says, to address loneliness, it's important to understand where it comes from. And so this is one place loneliness could come from. There are others, and people have different experiences of loneliness. Loneliness is found in the space between the person you know yourself to be and the people in your life who can see you that way. Imagine you're getting divorced and few people in your life know it. They continue to relate to you as normal, but you carry around a secret. No one sees you as you really are, broken and suffering over the loss of your relationship. And this can create distance between you and others. Alone in the knowledge of your upended life, you are on an island of pain. Loneliness inevitably follows. Loneliness is found in many of our most profound struggles. When we are single, we know ourselves to be worthy of love, but don't have someone who sees us this way. When we lose a loved one, we are shattered, but society assumes we will quickly bind our wounds. Even leaders feel loneliness. People place their expectations on them without seeing them as the person who bears their burden. And you can say even the truth is loneliness extends to people who are married and people with plenty of children in the home. He was also saying in another place that sometimes married people feel the most alone, lying in their bed next to somebody who seems like a stranger, God forbid. And if this is your case, I bless you with shalom bayit and togetherness, with yourself first, and then with partner. So, wow, that's definitely an interesting explanation of what it means to feel alone. And most of us know that when we go through something super trying, no matter how much other people are there for us or are caring, it's really us going through it alone. So, but here's the thing, like we said, when we feel this loneliness, we often feel bad. And so I want to go into some of the exploration I've thought about in loneliness and what to do with these unpleasant feelings. So first, let's question. If loneliness is such a pertinent topic in the Bible, in our tradition, in our lives, across every culture and society, across rich and poor, in relationship, not in relationship, young and old. So what's the truth? What's the truth? And if loneliness does carry a truth in it, then it probably also carries paradox, because most truths carry within them a paradox. So here's what it is. Take my following words with a grain of salt. You are alone. You are all alone. No, really, me, I'm alone. I'm all alone. I was born alone. I'm going to die alone. Even if there's people by my side, I'm going through this journey by myself. And technically and frankly, so are you. No one will ever be in your mind. No one will ever be in your emotions. No one will ever stand in your shoes, have been born where you were born, have been born to your parents, your siblings, your upbringing. You're alone in this experience. And that is true. All alone. Maybe that's validating, but, and that's also the point. Like, the point is, we are here to have a personal relationship with God, and we can front as we may and develop lots of connections with other people and go deep with them, and we can have accomplishments and achievements, but it's going to be at the end of the day how we feel in ourselves. And that is a lonely process, because I do it with myself and myself only. I can enhance my character. I can develop myself in relationship and in communication, but essentially at the end of the day, it's me, myself, and I. You, yourself, and you. But here's where the paradox comes in. I don't even know if I'm using that appropriately, but you'll get what I mean. We're never, ever, ever alone. There's no such thing as alone. God is always with us. It would be a joke to say that God wasn't with us, because we're within God. And our souls are a part of God, right? Chabad says our souls are a chelek mimal mamish. I think I got that right. I may have missed a word. But that our souls are literally a part of God. We do not exist without God. We are never, ever, ever alone. And besides all the cute, cheesy stuff, that if we do reach out, we're never alone. There's someone we could turn to. There's a rabbi, there's a friend, there's a family. Maybe it takes the courage or the vulnerability to get up and invite yourself somewhere or have a party. But, you're never alone. Like, even if you don't have any friends, you go to a community event. Like, so on the one hand, we're totally alone, mamish. And on the other hand, we're never alone. There's not even such a thing. So what? I still feel really bad when I feel lonely. And this is where I would like to introduce the psychology aspect of this episode, because I want to break a story. Sometimes we put together facts in our mind, and then we fuse them, and then we project a story all over the world, and then we believe it, and then we live as such, and we promote that culturally. So here's the story I want to blast. Being lonely doesn't actually mean that you're a loser, doesn't mean you're pathetic, doesn't mean you have no friends, doesn't mean nobody loves you, doesn't mean nobody cares about you, doesn't mean your hope for the future is gone, doesn't mean the future is bleak, doesn't mean there's no hope for you. Being lonely, if you're ready to break the story, means I feel lonely. And maybe it's hard, and maybe it's sad, but it doesn't mean you're all those bad things. It doesn't mean you're some pathetic, sucky, loser, idiot, stupid head. No, that's a myth our Yetzer Hara would like to add on to the already difficult experience of feeling alone. Because the Yetzer Hara loves to do that, right? Like, Hashem sets us up with trips in life so that we have different emotional experiences and then we can process them. But then the Yetzer Hara comes in and it's like, oh, you feel lonely? Now let me make you feel terrible about feeling lonely. So what I want to suggest is a total breaking of this story. I ask you, what would be different if the next day where you felt lonely, you just thought, oh, interesting, loneliness. You can like it, you can not like it can be really unpleasant, you can cry, you can do whatever you want to do around it, but are you telling yourself an extra story on top of that? Or is the Yetzer Hara telling you a story that you're some kind of lame, stupid, pathetic, dumb failure, God forbid, just because you feel lonely? Because the greatest of the great and the holiest of the holy and the most accomplished and the people with the most children also feel lonely sometimes, right? So I believe that when God gave us this profound human experience called loneliness, it wasn't just so that we could feel really, really bad about ourselves when we have a hard time getting out of bed, or, binge on some chips because I feel lonely, or go to self-pity. Like, God didn't just like create it like stam, right? Nothing is random. So I believe that when God created loneliness, he was helping us encounter our internal feelings so that we have an opportunity to offer ourselves self-compassion, self-empathy, self-nurturing, softness, gentility, and most of all, that we should develop a sense of self-love and acceptance. Because it will be up to you at the end of the day, when every one of us is going to go through this process of loneliness at some point in our lives, some more than others, some more frequently than others. How are you going to let judgment judge you at the end of the day? Is it going to be that I'm going to let self-hate come in and tell me how bad I am, and how I don't have any friends, and how there's no, despair, doom and gloom, bring them all in, Yitzhara? Am I going to stop that for a second? Hold up, wait a minute, and say, okay, well, look at that. I'm experiencing a feeling of loneliness. Okay, what's coming up for me? Maybe I'm feeling unwanted. Maybe, who knows what it could be. But when we feel so lonely, this is an opportunity to pause and offer ourselves our own best friendship, to be our own best friend. I think there's even a practice in Japanese culture, or was it a Hawaiian culture? I don't know. Someone wrote to me about it once. The practice of becoming your own best friend, there's a name for it. Because sometimes we're going to feel alone, and we could choose at that minute to let the Yitzhar come down on us, or just to hold ourselves through that time in life. Because this life can feel lonely. In my journey, I don't know how to move forward in my life. I don't know what to do next. I don't know what career move to make. I don't know how to mend this relationship with my spouse or my partner, or I don't have a partner. It's in our hands, as another one of God's profound life experiences, to decide how we'll deal with it. So I believe that this is also why there's so many paradoxical and different angles from which the Bible presents loneliness. Like we said, that at the end, Hashem will be left alone, that we are a nation that stands alone, that Rabbi Nachman says, go out and do hitbodedut, that David HaMelech, even though he felt profound calling out pain from his depths, that he used it to call out to God, not to disown himself. And then we have, it's not good for man to be alone. But listen how interesting. What does God say in that first introduction to loneliness not being good? So I'll make him a helpmate opposite to him, an ezer kenegdo. It means a helper opposite him. In other words, I'll give him something to help. How to explain this? Like to work against him, but why? To help him develop himself. Like, God does not give men nutsy wives just to put them through torture. He gives them wives that are difficult so that the wives can help whip them into shape and help them become the people they're meant to be. If you want a funny joke, which isn't so funny at all, but it's kind of funny, I learned, I think it was Rabbi Torsky who said, they say marriage is psychological. One side is psycho and the other is logical. But the point is that God gives us our opposition in life to help us grow. And that, so when God says it's not good for man to be alone, and then he gives him a helper against him, that's still happening with us, whether or not we have a partner or a spouse, is we have this helper against us, and maybe it's called loneliness. And it helps against us by gritting on us and challenging us and seeing where we will stand when we experience this. We can listen to those negative voices in our head that wants to tell us, well, I'm going to equate this story. You're lonely, and the movies portray lonely as bad, and in culture it's embarrassing to say you're lonely, so you should feel really bad about yourself. Or I feel lonely and it's hard, and maybe I just want to sit here in my bed alone and cry. Maybe I want to call a friend and be proactive about it. Maybe I just want to feel it. Maybe I want to unpack it. Maybe I want to see what I want to do with it. Maybe I just want to call out to God. But through all of this, I believe the appropriate response to loneliness is bringing God back in the picture. And God essentially is love, right? Adonai, Yod and Hey and Vav and Hey is 26. That shares the meaning of Ahava Echad, 13 and 13, one love. Right. So to really, when loneliness comes into our lives, because it will come, it's one of the challenges we get, then we just say, okay, I welcome God into the picture too, and I'm going to love myself through this. So I hope that you enjoyed this segment on Torah and psychology and the topic of loneliness in the Bible and our lives. And I look forward to seeing you on our next episode of Torah and Psychology. Peace in.